question lane. Solving problems through the process of questions and answers.
I just want to note for the record, with a lot of these extrajudicial killings that occurs today, and a lot of the lynchings that occurred in the past, just has this common theme of due process not being adhered to.
That's right.
Legal convictions not being sought.
That's right.
Politicians ignoring telegrams and
That's right.
forewarnings in the Associated Press and other news outlets, and receiving calls from organizations such as the NAACP and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of spectators, men, women, and children, occurring these lynchings, what they called lynch parties. Can you explain the concept of what a lynch party was?
Yes. In the earlier years of lynching, if it was known that a person was going to be lynched, word would get out in advance. People would come from miles around, sometimes from out of state, to witness this. It was like a circus. It was a public showing of extra legal justice. So yes, lynch parties would be held. Women and children. I have a photograph of a lynching in Fort Lauderdale where there's a little white girl standing looking up at the bodies. At the body, in this case, was just one man, Reuben Stacy. My grandmother told me that she knew of at least one lynch party in Volusia County that my daddy and she went to, and other black people went to it. So yes, these were kind of like public events that were intended to send a message, and folks enjoyed going out. They'd have a cookout before, during, and after the lynching. Now, that changed after the mid-1930s with the Claude Neal lynching, which was so public. Even the President of the United States knew it was going to happen before it happened. And this incredibly public lynching involving thousands of people who came to witness it, a few people actually did the lynching, was so egregious, so outrageous, that after that time, those kinds of lynchings, the circus atmosphere type of lynchings, diminished, and lynchings became more private affairs, where the person's, the white person's family, or the victim, if he or she survived this alleged attack, would then take someone out privately and lynch them.
And the Claude Neal lynching is the lynching that occurred in 1934 in Marianna, Florida. Is that correct?
That's right. It was particularly horrible lynching. I talked to Claude Neal's, to family members of Claude Neal, who still bear the psychological scars of what happened to him. I met his daughter, who was a little girl when her father was lynched. And she told me, Dr. Dunn, every time I pass by that courthouse where they hung his body, I still see my daddy hanging there. And she was in her 80s when I interviewed her. So these scars last a long time. People die with the memories of their loved ones having been lynched.
Like I said earlier in a podcast, I'm on the younger side, but I always, just reflecting back on my childhood, I would remember how my parents would say, "Hey, get inside the house before the sunlights come on. Get inside the house before it gets dark." Now, this is in Miami. We're not in a rural area. We're not in the country anywhere, and this is not 1930s, 1940s. Can you explain what the word sundown town means?
Oh, yes. A sundown town, any city or town that has the word beach in it was a sundown town. Any word, Miami Beach included. What it meant was that black people who were in that town had to be out by the time the sun went down. Otherwise, they were subject to arrest unless they had a pass, a written authorization from a white person giving reason for them to be in town after dark. So people knew, get out before the sun goes down.
And that's referring to Dr. James Lowen's book, Sundown Town.
Yes.
Interesting book for the listeners out there. It'll let you know that this definitely was not a Southern phenomenon as relates to people classified as black needing to be out of town when the sun goes down, or having a signed pass as if you are.
It was apartheid.
As if you
Same
are.
as in South
As
Africa.
if you were a child. And if you are familiar with, are you familiar with Mr. Neely Fuller Jr.?
No.
Mr. Neely Fuller Jr. wrote a book called The Compensatory Code System Concept, a textbook workbook for victims of racism, white supremacy, where he gives.
Oh, interesting.
He wrote this book in the late 70s, and he's put out a revised version in recent years. But essentially, he talks about giving counter-racist suggestions for what victims of white supremacy need to do in order to counter the system of racism, white supremacy. But he believes that under the system of racism, white supremacy, everybody that's classified as non-white are essentially children in this system of white supremacy. So getting a permission slip definitely sounds like something a child would get in class.
Well, it was more than just getting a permission slip. My mother was a maid on Miami Beach in the 1950s. I still have her ID card that was issued by the Miami Beach Police Department with her fingerprints on it. And she had to have that card on her when she was at work on Miami Beach. The prevailing view was that black people would steal. So the police would already have your fingerprints on record to make sure that they could fine you if there was some theft where you worked.
Okay. Another thing we want to discuss here is the convict lease system that began in 1877. Can you briefly explain what the convict lease system was?
Mm-hmm. Sure. Once slavery ended and blacks could not be made to go to work, you had certain industries in the South, the lumber industry, for example, but others that needed labor. So what was very common was that black men would be arrested on ridiculous charges, vagrancy usually, or loitering, or some other ridiculous charge, and then leased out by the police department, by the county, to private employers, to a man who ran a lumber company. So this company would have the benefit of virtually free labor provided by the county in the person of black men who would have to work for nothing. So this was a very, very abusive system that eventually ended. And if you look at the convicts who were normally subject to this kind of treatment, they were most often black men.
Going back to what we talked about earlier about who's more confused about racism, white supremacy, what it is and how it works currently, would it be accurate to say that an example to illustrate that white people are not confused about racism, would it be accurate to say that modern day for-profit prisons such as Geo Group, which is up the road in Boca Raton, if I'm not mistaken, would they be a primary example of the continuation of modern day slavery and the convict lease system that has started going back to 1870?
Well, I think you're very dead on point about how these private prisons are being used as a way of making money for white people on them. It's absolutely tragic. I'm not sure that I would relate it to slavery, but I certainly would have the view that it's very close to the convict leasing system, where these prisons have to be full in order for the private companies that own them to make money. And if you look at the folks who are in the prisons, and we can argue about why there's so many more black people, men in prison than white, the victims of this private prison system are black men. And even the current leadership in Florida and in Washington gives credence and support to this mass incarceration and misuse of black people as a part of the criminal justice system.
And just to add on to what Dr. Dunn said, Michelle Alexander wrote an excellent book. It's escaping me right now. But that's definitely a good book to talk about mass incarceration and the continual legacy of this history that was started such long ago. And in this case, what we're talking about with Dr. Dunn, the convict lease system, is definitely something that has been perpetuated even to today.
Can I just mention one other thing about this?
Yes, sir.
When I was doing my research for the Black Miami book that I wrote, I looked at the jail record in Miami, Florida, for it must have been 1901. The city was less than 5 years old, and 98% of the people who were in jail were black at that moment. So going back in our history, we've always had the illegal use of the criminal justice system to imprison and exploit black people.
On page 37, you talk about a concept referred to as multiple lynchings, where on June 9th, 1895, William Collins was lynched in Lafayette County for attempted rape, along with at least two additional blacks who supposedly hid Collins from the mob. What role do you think these extrajudicial acts of terrorism plays in people classified as black not wanting to help other black people when they are identified specifically by whites as targets?
Well, there are a number of instances in which blacks who were being sought by white mobs were turned in by black people. Unfortunately. It was a dangerous thing if a black man who was being sought by the police came to your house and you helped him or hid him, the mob would then come in and lynch you. And sometimes people who were being sought were helped, and folks who helped them did get away with it. But it was a risky thing to do, to help somebody who was on the run from the police, from a mob. But what's your question beyond that? Was it?
No, I just want to know what role does that play in even to modern day times where black people don't want to help other black people when they are identified as targets by whether it be police officers or just random white people.
Okay, yeah. Well, that's a two-edged sword. If you have black folks who know that somebody black committed a murder, committed a crime, and you know the person did it, and you don't cooperate with the police, you hide this person, so this person can continue to rape and take advantage of the community with impunity because no one's going to turn them in, I have a problem with that. I think people should cooperate with the police when you know that someone has broken the law, rather than hiding it. The not squealing, that's part of the problem that we have. If you know somebody did something, tell it, damn it. What can I tell you? You got guys, and listen, I now work with murderers. My job now, I work with people heading to death row. I have 35 clients who are either on death row or who are heading to death row. These are guys that I work with every day. There are many of my clients who were able to do what they did for a long period of time because nobody told and people knew what they were doing. So, I'm not down with that. What can I tell you? I'm not down with that.
That's interesting. The snitching concept. We're going to get to that later.
You want to get to a lot of stuff in this interview. What do you have in mind? 2-3 hours here?
Hey, I respect.
You take what you can get, right?
I can take what I can get, and I respect your brilliance on this topic.
Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed the content, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Stay up to date for more videos by clicking the bell notification icon and following our social media. For any of the people, groups, companies, or videos that were referenced in this video, don't forget to check the description and or the pinned comment section. The question lane, solving problems through the process of questions and answers.